Hey everybody, welcome. My name's Brendan and today we're going to talk about smashing bias within your teams and within an organisation. But before that, I'd really appreciate it if you could just nudge the like button and also if you could kindly subscribe, because that would mean a lot to me, and also make sure that you get any of the most recent and latest content. And with that, let's dive in. In today's video, we're going to talk about bias. As a leader, it is absolutely imperative that you are aware, you see, you interrupt, and you get rid of bias. Now, it's fair to say, I don't know what the exact number is, but I think there are millions and maybe even billions of dollars spent per annum, so every year, on anti-bias training. Does it work? I don't know. There's probably an HR stat somewhere that says X number of people changed the ways that they operated and changed their habits as a result of the anti-bias training. But really, does it work? I'm not so sure. The whole point of doing this training is to make the workplace more inclusive. Because in actual fact, becoming more inclusive leads to innovation and more effectiveness. That can only be a good thing. But the problem is, how do you identify and how do you break any biases that are in the workplace? If you're a leader and you have a team to manage, it is your responsibility to make sure that any bias is either identified, addressed, and smashed. Now, smashed is my word, but the point is, if we don't take positive action and start to really make change, all we're doing is paying this lip service. Now, I'm fully aware there are a number of really big initiatives that are going on across the globe at the moment, and talking about subjects like this can be uncomfortable. There are parts of my life where I've been very fortunate to bypass any bias. But now, as in a position of leadership, it is my responsibility to make sure that bias is tackled and addressed and smashed. So the question is, as a leader, what can you do? Now, bias takes many forms, and you've only got to look around you in the workplace as and when we actually get back into the office to think, well, what is the preconceived idea? What is the misjudgment? What is the prejudice that you might hold against somebody else unconsciously, subconsciously, without even realizing? But it's massively important that we make a change. We could always use a tip that I've adopted when nutrition training, and that is, it's called notice and name. When you notice something, name it. You don't actually have to name it out loud. It might make you sound a bit silly, but the point is, notice a name, write it down, make a note of exactly when it is that you felt that way. Why did you think that way? Why was that the first thing you thought of? Was that the right thing to do? What could you do about it? And how can you make a change? Noticing and naming is a massively powerful tool, and I'd encourage you all to think about using that going forwards. So the first part is to really understand how bias can manifest itself. And there are 4 ways that I believe it manifests. Firstly, it can be classed as prove it again. Some demographics have to keep reinforcing and reproving themselves to leadership, to management, to whichever executive it might be. Why is that? Is it because we as leaders have bias against them? Quite possibly. Now, I'm really conscious that a lot of what we're going to talk about today can make people feel uncomfortable. I know that I felt uncomfortable about it in the past because I also don't know the best way to talk about it. I don't know the best way to approach it. I am just as guilty as anybody else as not making positive change because I've kept quiet. Not anymore. That's the point of doing this, and this is why we need to positively make change in the world. Number 2, there's a tightrope. Certain groups have narrower range of behaviours that they have to adhere to compared to others. You've probably seen it. Some people get away with murder. Not really, but you know what I mean. Whereas others have to really fight for it, have to work for it, have to go over and above. Why is that? Chances are there's a bias in there somewhere. The maternal wall is one that we've all probably seen. Women with children see their commitment questioned. Either it's that they should be focusing on the family and life outside of work, or if they come back to work, are they too career focused? Almost a no-win situation. It is up to us to make sure that we don't instill that bias. But first, we've got to see that it's there. And number 4, tug of war. Unfortunately, many times disadvantaged groups are often pitted against each other. Those that are fortunate and don't have the bias against them are fine. And then other disadvantaged groups have to fight it out amongst themselves to be able to get to where they need to be. Is that right? Absolutely not. So those 4 are ways that bias can manifest itself in the workplace. Now, I'm absolutely sure that making these changes is going to be hard. Having a hard conversation is the first part. Notice it, name it, make a change, make sure that you don't just sit there and just watch it go by. Because just like Black Lives Matter, sitting there and saying nothing is now no longer acceptable. Something to think about. So the second part is noticing when these biases arise. We can't let them go unaddressed, especially if there is no company directive. It is up to you as a leader to make sure that you address these biases head on. It won't be easy, but that's how we grow. Ultimately, if you can become a bias interrupter, which is a phrase I've read in the Harvard Business Review, you will become a better leader, a better person, and we will make a better workplace. Now that can only be a good thing. So the question is, how are we going to do it? Funny you should ask. Let me tell you. The first way to do it is to pick your people. Picking your people means creating a diverse and inclusive team. There's quite a school of thought that says limit the amount of referral hires. Why? Because the bias dictates that often people hire images of themselves or people like themselves. Well, that's not a good way to go. You've only got to go into the way that groups are formed and think, well, actually, if you've got a lot of idea generation people and not enough doers, you're going to come up with some fabulous ideas but get nothing done. The same is true when picking your teams and picking your people. You need to define the culture fit. You need to establish objective criteria. All of this is to create significant accountability to not only yourself, but to those around you. So this is something that as leaders, when we go through the hiring process, we are all capable of influencing. Unfortunately, in days gone by, when you've been part of leadership teams, you'd sit there, and I've done it in the past. I started an email with chaps. Did make me sit back and think, geez, that means that we're all part of the same sex. There's no diversity in that. Now, I don't believe it was done on purpose, but you sit there and think, my word, if I'm starting an email with chaps because there's just 6 or 7 white males, what have we done to create a diverse environment? We have the power to change, and we have the power to influence who gets employed. Let's make sure that we do it in a good and wholehearted way. Number 2, it's managing the day-to-day. We see the biases manifest themselves in many ways. When was the last time you saw somebody say to a female, can you do some of the admin on this? Can you take notes? Can you take the minutes? There is a statistic that Harvard came up with that said 20% more women do the admin and the workplace admin than men. Why is that? Is there a rational reason that is objective and has gone through the right protocols? Maybe, maybe not. But we've got to identify these things. Conversely, there's corresponding studies that say if the workplace admin gets passed predominantly onto the females, the males end up getting the glamour work, the opportunities to network, the opportunities for career development. Well, why should women and other groups not get the same opportunities? Now, I'm really keen to articulate that it's not just about given a fair opportunity. You want the best person for the role. You want the right person in the right place, regardless of sex, age, creed, colour, whatever it might be. But it's really important that we know the biases that we can fall into the trap of. That's why mindfully designing the teams that work on high-profile projects is super important. Make sure that you do take every consideration into account. But the real takeaway, I think, from this section is if you see double standards, you need to call it out and address it. Double standards is not acceptable anymore. In fact, as a leader who hopefully operates with integrity, now I know that integrity is one of the biggest values that I adhere to, double standards should not be anywhere near the workplace. It would reflect on you as a person, let alone as a leader and as somebody that may or may not have bias. Don't let that be you. Make sure that you tackle double standards straight out. These can manifest themselves in the phrase that I've heard recently called manterruptions. And that's where a male talks over a female who may be imparting her ideas, her thoughts, her point of view. That's not right. Not only is it rude, it's a way that people drown out others. That can be called out and say, hold on, Sandra hasn't finished making a point yet. Please, you'll have your turn. Or conversely, you might turn around and say, actually, that's a great point, Sandra. I completely agree with you. I would support that approach. No, it's about being objective. Don't just talk over somebody. Don't be a douchebag. We've all seen that person. He who shouts loudest wins. Get stuffed. Be articulate, be clear, do the right thing. Ultimately, how you act is how people will remember. And I would rather be remembered as somebody that always did the right thing. Now 3, developing your team. As a leader, it is your responsibility to get the best out of people, but also to develop them. You know, how do you develop your team? It's things like fair reviews, creating opportunities for everybody. There's a crazy statistic that says only 3% of women ever make it into the C-suite compared to 8% of men. Not quite sure what makes up the other 91%, but the point is, are you giving your teams the right opportunities? Are you being unbiased in your judgments? We're trying to level the playing fields. Now, I'm not going to sit here in a potential ivory tower and tell everybody that I've done it perfectly in the past, because I think that's nonsense. I'm sure I haven't. I'm just far more aware of the biases that exist now, and I desperately want to try and make a change. I'm not always going to get it right. I spoke to a good friend of mine in the last week or so, and we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. As somebody that's probably not experienced a great deal of the hardship that others have been through, I want to learn and understand how I can do things better. What was the response? A hugely fascinating conversation, which I'm not going to go into now. But I hope he won't mind in me saying, the first question we need to answer is, do we care? Do we care enough to do something about it? If the answer is yes, we do care, then what are we going to do? Conversely, if the answer is we don't care, fine. Step back, step away, go and do your own thing. But do you care? Now, do you care can be applied to this bias question as well. Put the Black Lives Matter movement to one side for a moment and say, for bias, do you care? And if you do care, you need to do something about it. At this stage, if you do care and you understand how biases can manifest themselves, it is up to you to make the difference. Now, I can't cover all of the biases and how to tackle them in this one video, and I'm sure we'll go into it in the future. But the point is, if you identify and you can see it, you can begin to tackle it. But you need to decide whether you care. I care, and I want you to be a great leader too. Now with that, I will wish you all a great week, and I will see you in the next video.